I had just returned from the hospital, my body weak and fragile from 10 days of surgeries and recovery. I could barely hold my own weight as I walked through the door of my home, expecting peace, comfort, and the warmth of family. But instead, what I found was a scene I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. There, in the living room, my husband and my daughter-in-law were locked in a tight embrace, their bodies pressed together in a way that left me frozen in disbelief. And, as if that wasn't enough, her hands weren't just around him, they were around the life we had built. The man I'd spent over 2 decades with was hugging the very woman I had once trusted as my own. Tears of shock stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. What was unfolding before me wasn't just a betrayal. It was a public execution of everything I thought I knew about my family. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding, knowing something had to change, and it wasn't going to be me. I stood there, watching them, feeling as though I had stepped into someone else's life. I had spent the past 10 days in the hospital, recovering from a minor procedure that I had hoped would bring me a fresh start, a return to normalcy. But now, standing at the threshold of the home I had worked so hard to build, I was struck by the harsh reality that my life, the one I had carefully nurtured, was falling apart in front of me. Michael and I had been married for nearly 20 years. When I met him, he was everything I had ever wanted: charming, ambitious, and attentive. Our relationship had been built on mutual respect and admiration. He was the kind of man who always knew the right thing to say, always the center of attention in any room, and I loved the way he made me feel special. We had 2 children, Jonas and Claire, and we had built a life together that many would envy. Our house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, was a reflection of our years of hard work. The 2 of us had shared dreams of watching our children grow, seeing them off to college, and eventually retiring in peace. But looking back now, there were cracks in that picture-perfect life. Cracks I hadn't wanted to see. I remember the late nights Michael would come home, his tie loosened, his voice a little too light, as though he was trying too hard to convince me that everything was fine. He'd tell me about his day, about the clients he met, but somehow, I never felt like he was truly sharing. It was as if there was a part of him that I wasn't allowed to know about. And then there were the quiet evenings, when he would retreat into his study, spending hours on the phone, his words hushed and secretive. There were moments, too, with Eva, she had always been a part of our lives, Jonah's college sweetheart, the woman who had seamlessly entered our family. In the early days, I had adored her. She was sweet, caring, and looked after Michael when I couldn't. But over the last year, I noticed subtle shifts in her behavior. The way she looked at him sometimes, as if there were an unspoken bond between them, or how she would always be just a little too eager to help with things around the house when Michael was around. It was never overt, nothing I could put my finger on, but something in me felt the stirrings of unease. In the weeks leading up to my hospital stay, Michael had seemed distant. He had always been busy with work. But this time it felt different. He wasn't as present. His attention seemed to drift whenever I spoke to him. I chalked it up to stress. He had been dealing with a tough project at work, and I didn't want to burden him further. But as I lay in the sterile hospital room, recovering, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was slipping away from me. And now, standing here, I realized I had been blind to the truth, blind to the growing distance between us. The betrayal that greeted me when I walked through the door was not just the physical act of my husband and daughter-in-law standing so intimately together. It was the culmination of months, maybe even years, of subtle signs I had ignored. I had let myself believe that everything was fine, that the foundation we had built together was strong enough to weather any storm. But the cracks had been there all along, and now they had shattered everything. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart hammering in my chest, as Michael and Eva slowly pulled apart. The air between us was thick with an uncomfortable silence, and for a brief moment, I thought I might be imagining it all. But no, the sight before me was real. Michael, the man I had trusted and loved for nearly 25 years, stood there, with my daughter-in-law's arm still lingering on his shoulders. His face, once warm and familiar, now seemed strangely distant. I felt a cold rush of disbelief, followed by a slow, suffocating wave of hurt. I wanted to scream, to run to them, and demand answers. But the words caught in my throat. I could feel my hands trembling, my breath shallow, and yet, I didn't move. I just stood there, trying to make sense of it all. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. This wasn't the life I had built. This wasn't the love I had poured into my family. I finally broke the silence. What is going on here? My voice sounded foreign to me, too calm, too composed, as though I were outside of my own body. I didn't raise my voice, didn't allow the anger to spill out just yet. I couldn't afford to lose control, not here, not now. I needed to understand. My eyes flicked between them, first to Michael, then to Eva. She looked away first. Her face flushed with guilt, while Michael met my gaze with an unsettling look of resignation. There was something different in his eyes. It wasn't just guilt, it was something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. Eva cleared her throat and took a hesitant step back, but she didn't leave. Mom, double quotes, she started, her voice faltering. But Michael cut her off, stepping in front of her with a protective gesture. He was trying to shield her, the very woman who had been standing so close to him just moments before, the woman who had crossed a line I never thought she would. Rachel, it's not what you think, Michael said, his voice strained. But it was too late for excuses. His words were empty, meaningless now. I wanted to lash out, to throw every hurtful word I could think of, to demand how long this had been going on, how many lies I had been fed over the years. But I stayed quiet. The anger was there, just below the surface, bubbling up like a storm that wanted to break free. Still, I swallowed it down. It wasn't the time for chaos. Not yet. Not what I think, I echoed, my voice colder than I intended. Then what is it? What's been going on between the two of you? How long has this been happening? I barely recognized the words as they left my mouth, demanding, cutting, and yet they didn't feel like they belonged to me. They felt foreign. Michael opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His silence spoke louder than any excuse he could offer. My stomach turned. I wanted answers. I needed them, but the truth seemed too painful to accept. The betrayal felt like a wound that couldn't heal. It was a slow, steady ache that dug deeper the more I tried to understand. Eva took a step forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes were downcast, unable to meet mine. I could tell she was conflicted, torn between what she had done and the reality of the family she was breaking apart. But in that moment, there was no excuse, no justification that could make me understand. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about disrespect. She had been part of my life, my son's wife, someone I trusted. But now, I was left questioning everything. Every moment of kindness, every shared memory, now felt like a cruel joke. The hurt I felt didn't come in waves. It didn't crash over me with the force I expected. Instead, it was a slow, agonizing realization that started in my chest and spread through every part of me. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, was standing before me, his silence condemning him more than any words could. And the woman I had welcomed into my family, my own daughter-in-law, had crossed a line that could never be erased. I looked at both of them for a long moment, taking in the sight of them together, standing so close to one another, yet so far from me. It wasn't just the physical distance, it was the emotional gulf that had grown between us, one I hadn't noticed until now. The betrayal was not just in the actions of the moment, it was in every overlooked sign, every moment of denial I had refused to confront. You should go, I said, my voice a sharp whisper, filled with a quiet rage that I had never known I was capable of. Both of you, leave, I need to think. Michael looked like he was about to protest, but I cut him off. Now, I said firmly. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He knew, just as I did, that nothing could fix this now. There was no fixing what had been broken. They left the room, Ava's footsteps barely audible behind Michael's heavier ones. As the door clicked shut, I stood in the emptiness they had left behind, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. The house felt too quiet, too still. It was as though everything that had come before was now irrelevant, like we were no longer a family. Not in the way we had been before, and in that silence, I knew one thing for certain. This was no longer the life I had known. The door clicked shut behind them, and for a long moment, I just stood there, the silence pressing down on me like a physical weight. My thoughts were scattered, a million questions racing through my mind, but no answers seemed to come. What had I missed? How had this happened under my nose? The house, once filled with the noise of laughter and shared moments, now felt empty, hollow. It felt foreign, as if the life I thought I was living had been stripped away, leaving only fragments in its place. I sank into the armchair, my hands gripping the armrests as I tried to slow my breathing. I couldn't let myself unravel. Not now. Not in front of them, not in front of anyone. I had always prided myself on being the one who kept things together, who knew how to solve problems. But this wasn't something I could fix with a few words or a well-timed gesture. This was something deeper, something that had been festering beneath the surface for longer than I cared to admit. I needed time. I needed space to think. My thoughts drifted back to Michael. I tried to piece together the man I had known for over 2 decades, the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with. But as I thought about it, the man I had loved seemed increasingly distant. It was as though he had been a stranger all along, someone I had simply allowed myself to believe in. The cracks had always been there, hadn't they? I just hadn't wanted to see them. There had been signs, little things that I had brushed off, or dismissed as the natural wear and tear of a long marriage. Michael's late nights, his increasing need for space, the way his eyes would sometimes wander when I spoke to him. I had told myself it was just the stress of work, or the strain of family obligations. But now, as I replayed those moments, I realized they were pieces of a puzzle I had failed to put together. He had been pulling away for months, maybe even years, and I had let him. I had been so caught up in the routine of our lives, in the belief that everything was fine, that I hadn't questioned the small, subtle changes. The distance between us had been growing for a while, but I hadn't been paying attention. And then there was Eva, the woman who had once been like a daughter to me. How had I not seen it? How had I not recognized the way she began to act around Michael, the way she sought him out in a way that felt too intimate? At first, I had thought it was just her being sweet, always wanting to help, to be there for us. But now I saw it for what it was, a slow, deliberate manipulation. Eva had woven herself into our family, quietly taking her place, and I had welcomed her with open arms. But in the end, she had betrayed me just as much as Michael had, perhaps even more so. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it all settle on me. Betrayal. The word echoed in my mind like a drumbeat, louder with every passing second. Betrayal by the man I had shared my life with, and betrayal by the woman who had been a part of my family. It wasn't just the affair, or the betrayal of trust, it was the complete disregard for everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. Michael had never respected me enough to be honest, and Eva, in her own way, had slowly chipped away at the foundation of our family, waiting for the right moment to strike. But I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I couldn't. I had worked too hard, fought too many battles to let this one defeat me. Michael thought he had control, thought he could push me aside without consequence, but I was no fool. This was my life, my future, and I wasn't going to let either of them take it from me. I stood up slowly, walking over to the window. The night outside was quiet, peaceful, almost surreal, given the storm raging inside me. The life I had known was gone, but I was still here, and that meant something. I wasn't going to let this betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let it break me. As I looked out at the darkened street, my mind began to work. There would be no rash decisions, no emotional outbursts. I had seen what that kind of reaction did to people, to marriages, to families. I wouldn't make that mistake. This would be different. I would take my time, think carefully about what came next. I had to be strategic, calculating. I couldn't let them see my pain. They had already seen the hurt in my eyes, but they hadn't seen my resolve. They hadn't seen the part of me that had always been strong, the part of me that had built everything from the ground up. I needed to gain control. I needed to start planning, but I would do it on my own terms. First, I would make sure I understood the full scope of what had been happening behind my back. I would talk to lawyers. I would protect what was mine, my home, my business, my legacy. Michael may have thought he could tear it all apart, but he hadn't realized just how much I was capable of. Eva, too, had underestimated me. She thought she could waltz into my life and take it all from me. But I would not let that happen. Tomorrow, I would begin. But tonight, I allowed myself the quiet space to think, to process, to remind myself that I was still in control, and that this, too, would pass. The days following that night were a blur. The house, once a place filled with the sounds of family life, now felt like a cold, hollow shell. I didn't speak to Michael. I didn't need to. Everything had already been said without words. The silence between us stretched longer and longer, and I could feel it gnawing at me, eating away at whatever was left of the life I thought I had. But I had decided I couldn't just sit in the wreckage of what had been. I had to do something, and I had to do it now. I knew that confronting Michael would only get me so far. He had already shown his true colors, his disregard for the life we had built, and for me, the betrayal had been evident in his actions long before that moment in the living room, and it wasn't just about Eva anymore. It was about him, too. Michael had been the one to tear the fabric of our family. And now it was time to take control back from him. I made a decision the morning after they left, and I kept it to myself. I would confront them both, but this time, it wouldn't be with emotion or desperation. I wasn't going to let my pain be their weapon. No, this time, I would approach it differently. This time, I would handle it like a business transaction, something cold and clinical. I would not let them see me sweat. I began making the calls. First, I contacted a lawyer I had worked with briefly in the past for some estate planning. Her name was Linda, and she was sharp, no nonsense. I didn't want anyone who would sugarcoat the situation for me. I needed someone who would help me make the right moves, no matter how hard they might be. Rachel, it's good to hear from you. Linda's voice was calm, professional. What's going on? I explained, succinctly, what had happened: Michael's affair, the betrayal, the need to act swiftly to protect what was mine. I could hear Linda take a breath on the other side of the line. I wasn't sure if she was surprised or just processing, but I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was asking for guidance. I'll have some papers ready for you, she said. We'll start with a formal separation agreement. You need to protect yourself legally, financially, and emotionally. Michael doesn't get to walk away with everything he's taken for granted. I could feel the tension in my chest easing, just a little. This was what I needed. I needed a plan, and Linda was giving me the structure to make it happen. The next few days were a blur of appointments, papers, and phone calls. I worked with Linda to restructure my assets, making sure that everything was legally separated. It wasn't just about the financials, though. That was certainly a huge part of it. It was about reclaiming my sense of control, my sense of self. I also began to reflect more on Michael. How had he thought I wouldn't see it? How had he convinced himself that this would go unnoticed? He had become complacent, and in doing so, he had handed me the power to make my move. The truth was, I had been the backbone of this family for years. I had worked, supported, nurtured. Michael had been the face, the charming, well-dressed man at the dinner parties, the one everyone adored. But he had failed to see the cracks in his own behavior, and now, I was the one who held the cards. By the time I had everything in order, it was time to act. I invited Michael over to the house, under the pretense of wanting to talk. I hadn't spoken to him since that night, and I knew he would be expecting an emotional outburst, maybe even an apology from me. He would have expected me to beg for his attention, to cry, to fall apart. But that wasn't going to happen. When he arrived, I could see the unease in his eyes. He was trying to appear calm, but I knew him too well. The way his jaw tightened, the way his hands fidgeted in his pockets, was clear he wasn't in control. He had expected a different kind of conversation. He had expected to be the one to dictate the terms. We sat in the living room, the space where everything had fallen apart just days ago. This time, there was no tension in the air, not the kind I had been used to. This was different. The silence was mine now. Rachel, he started, his voice hesitant. I know this is difficult, but we need to talk about everything. I looked at him then, my gaze steady and unflinching. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt no pity for him. No, Michael, we don't need to talk about everything, I replied, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk about what comes next. Because this, I gestured, between us, is over. He blinked, clearly thrown off guard. What do you mean? His voice was defensive, trying to regain control of the conversation. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Okay, let's work through this. We've been through tough times before. Leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. No, Michael, you don't get to apologize and move on like this never happened. You've crossed a line that there's no coming back from. This isn't about us anymore. This is about me. I've been your partner in everything, in life, in business, and in love. But what you've done, what you've allowed to happen, is beyond repair. And now, I'm taking the necessary steps to protect myself and what's mine. His face fell. The color drained from his cheeks as he realized the gravity of what I was saying. You can't be serious, he whispered, almost pleading. What do you want from me? I thought we were still. I cut him off. No, Michael. I've already taken action. I'm protecting my assets. I've already contacted my lawyer, and we're moving forward with a formal separation. You won't be taking anything from me. Your affair, your betrayal has already cost you everything. I stood up then, walking toward the door. You need to leave now, I said, my voice cool and unwavering. We're done. Michael stood in shock, unable to respond. As he stumbled toward the door, I knew he could feel the weight of the truth settling over him. I wasn't the woman who would beg for him back, who would cry for his forgiveness. I wasn't the woman who would silently accept his betrayal. I was done being a victim. I had taken control, and now I would rebuild my life on my terms. That as the door closed behind him, I allowed myself a small, satisfied breath. It wasn't over, not yet. But it was a beginning, a new beginning. This was my move, and Michael had no idea what was coming next. The days after Michael left were a blur. The house felt eerily quiet, the silence heavier than I could have anticipated, but the calmness of it also gave me space to breathe, to finally feel like I had some control over my life again. I spent the first few days alone, reflecting on the weight of the decisions I had made and the reality of what had just happened. My thoughts were mixed. There was relief, but there was also sadness, grief for what had been lost. It was strange to think about a future without the man who had been by my side for so long. But even stranger was realizing that I was capable of moving forward without him. I met with Linda, the lawyer, to finalize the legal steps. The papers were signed, the separation agreed upon. There was no courtroom drama, no long-winded fights. It was all business, clear and final. Michael didn't contest it, not that I thought he would. After everything that had happened, he had no power left. The financial assets were divided. My business, the one I had built from the ground up, remained untouched. It felt surreal too. Look at the numbers on paper and realize that it was all mine now. But even with all the legalities behind me, there was still the emotional fallout to deal with. I hadn't just lost a husband, I had lost the family I thought I knew. Ava's betrayal cut deeper than I had expected. I had trusted her, welcomed her into my life as if she were my own daughter. The pain of her actions lingered, a constant ache that I couldn't quite shake. She had been part of everything I thought was stable, everything I had worked for, and now she was gone too, at least in the way I had known her. I didn't speak to her for weeks after that day. There were no tearful apologies, no attempts at reconciliation. I didn't want that kind of closure. What I wanted was peace. I had to protect myself from any further emotional damage, and that meant cutting off the people who had betrayed me. My relationship with Eva, at least for now, was over. The hardest part, though, was dealing with Jonas, my son. He was caught in the middle of all of this, and that broke my heart more than anything. I knew this wasn't just about me and Michael, it was about him too. His entire view of family had been shattered, and I couldn't change that. I didn't know how to fix the damage that had been done, but I made sure to be there for him, to offer him support even if I didn't have all the answers. Slowly, he began to open up to me. We spent more time together, talking about everything and nothing. He was healing, as was I. In the weeks that followed, I began to redefine my life. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point, it was about reclaiming the person I had lost along the way. I threw myself back into my practice, focusing on the patients who relied on me. I started working on projects that had been put on the back burner for years, things I had neglected in the name of keeping a marriage intact. I found fulfillment in my work, and that fulfillment started to heal the parts of me that had been broken. There were still days when I found myself sitting in the quiet of my home, the absence of Michael's presence, a stark reminder of everything that had changed. There were moments when I caught myself thinking of what could have been, of the life I thought I was building, but those moments were fewer now, and they didn't hold the same weight they once did. I had rebuilt something far more important than the life I had lost. I had rebuilt myself. I was no longer the woman who stood silently by, waiting for her life to fall apart. I was the woman who had survived that fall and learned how to stand tall again. The journey wasn't over, I knew that, but I had taken the first step toward healing. And that was enough for now. As I sat in the quiet of my home one evening, I realized that while Michael and Eva had taken so much from me, they hadn't taken my strength, and in the end, that would be the thing that carried me through, the thing that would see me through to the next chapter of my life. It was a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. As the months passed, the remnants of the betrayal slowly began to fade, replaced by a quiet, steady peace. The house, once a place of tension and heartbreak, now felt like mine again. I had walked through the fire and come out on the other side, not unscathed, but stronger. The woman I had been before, the one who had clung to a life built on lies, longer existed. She had been replaced by someone else, someone who was not only surviving but beginning to thrive. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when the memories would catch me off guard. A memory of Michael's laughter, or the way we used to talk about our future, would rise up unbidden, and for a second I'd feel the weight of loss all over again. But those moments grew fewer with time. Slowly, the pain that once threatened to drown me had given way to something deeper: understanding. I understood that while Michael's betrayal had stolen much from me, it had also given me something invaluable, a new sense of self. I had spent years pouring myself into my marriage, into my family, into everything except the one thing that mattered most: me. It wasn't until I was forced to face the wreckage of my life that I realized just how much I had neglected my own desires, my own passions. I had become so consumed with being a good wife, a good mother, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be just me. But now, that was changing. I had poured myself back into my work, into the practice I had built with my own hands. I began mentoring young cardiologists, especially women, and watching them grow in their careers brought me a sense of fulfillment I had never known before. I no longer measured my worth by the size of my home or the number of guests at my dinner parties. I measured it by the lives I touched, the people I helped, and the impact I had on those around me. I had learned that strength wasn't about never breaking, it was about rising every time you fell. And I had fallen hard, but I had risen, too. With each step, I grew more confident in my ability to face whatever came next. I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. In fact, I looked forward to it. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace, to shape with my own hands. And as for Michael, I realized something important. His betrayal, while painful, had freed me. It had stripped away the illusion of the life I thought I had, and in its place, it had revealed the truth. I was capable of far more than I had ever imagined. I wasn't just a wife, I wasn't just a mother. I was Rachel, a woman with her own dreams, her own goals, her own life to live. I had healed, not by forgetting what happened, but by understanding it, by embracing the pain and using it to fuel my own growth. I had learned that pain, when processed and understood, could be a powerful force for transformation. Now, as I sat quietly in my home, looking out the window at the horizon, I realized that I wasn't just moving on, I was moving up. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And as I faced the future, I did so with the calm assurance that I had weathered the storm. And now, I was ready to live my life on my own terms, for the first time in years.